people don't get that. Is there's all this talk about get your mind right, but think of it like hardware, physical functioning of your brain, software, your mind, network connections, your relationships. If the hardware's not right, the software won't run, and the network connections will be faulty. And so at Amen Clinics, we have 9 clinics around the country where we see thousands of patients every month, that it's like, get your brain right. And then we want to program it. Your mind's really important, and we want to help you work on your relationships. But if your brain's not right, nothing else is going to be as good as it can be.
So if someone is doing exercises or practices in their relationships, dealing with anger management, stress, anxiety, depression, if they're working on the software and not the hardware, what will happen?
This is not as effective. I mean, it can be very helpful,
Right.
But just like the computer analogy. And I didn't know this. It was in 1991 when I ordered my first SPECT scan. SPECT is the study we do at Amen Clinics. I'm already a double board certified psychiatrist. I'd been a psychiatrist for about a decade. And I always felt like I was throwing darts in the dark at my patients. That there's a great book called The Structure of Scientific Revolution. Because if what I'm doing is right, and I believe it is, it's really creating a revolution in brain health, mental health care. And the first step of the revolution, Thomas Kuhn wrote about in 1962, is you notice a flaw in the system. And I was taught, was really well trained. I trained to be a psychiatrist at the Walter Reed Army Medical Center in Washington, D.C. And if you have 6 of these 9 symptoms, you get diagnosed with depression. And then I give you a medication.
Right.
Like
that's what you did for
Prozac.
A while.
But some of the people I'd put on Prozac got better, and some of them became suicidal. Some of them became aggressive. Some of them became obsessive and anxious. And I'm like, this isn't working like it should.
Right.
And
for a small percentage, maybe it helps, but not for everyone.
Well, maybe even a good percentage it helps, but a good percentage it hurts, which would horrify me because I would always feel off balance. I didn't know this would work, that would work. Plus, I didn't care about my own brain at all because I hadn't seen it. And in 1991, when I started ordering scans, I scanned my mom. She had a beautiful, healthy brain. I scanned me, and it wasn't healthy. But I played football in high school. I had meningitis when I was a young soldier. And I had bad habits. I wasn't sleeping. I was eating fast food. And when I scanned myself, I developed a concept. I wanted my mother's brain. And so I called that brain envy. Freud was wrong. Penis envy is not the cause of anybody's problem. You got to learn to love and care for your brain. And so the next 30 years, I've been figuring out how can I have a better brain? Because when I have a better brain, I have a better life. And what I realized is depression's not one thing. That's why Prozac didn't work for everyone. For some people, they have really low blood flow and activity in the brain. For some people, it's really high. And for some people, they had head injuries. In fact, if you go, hey, Daniel, single most important thing you've learned from 183,000 scans, that's how many we've done, is that mild traumatic brain injury is a major cause of psychiatric illness.
Oh, man.
And nobody knows about it because psychiatrists, by and large, never look at the brain.
What does psychiatric illness mean? Is it the same thing as mental health disorder, mental health disease? What does that mean?
Right. I mean, it's the same thing. It's people who struggle with anxiety, depression, OCD, PTSD, schizophrenia, attention deficit disorder, addictions. But
So you're saying if we played football, we're screwed forever?
you're vulnerable.
Okay.
Since we played football and you're bigger and probably way better than me, so you got your head hit more.
Yes.
I was on the best position in the field, which is I was a backup quarterback. Best position in the field.
We're on the field, yeah.
but you're clearly more vulnerable. So in 2007, Anthony Davis came to see me. He's the Hall of Fame running back from USC. He's called the Notre Dame Killer because in 1972 he scored 6 touchdowns against the University of Notre Dame. And he was at the time confused. He had memory deficits. He had temper problems. He's getting into fights. He had no business. And one day he's driving on the 405 and he had no idea where he was going. And he pulled over, called a friend of him at the USC School of Medicine. He says, you should go see Dr. Raymond. Wow. And when I saw him, his brain at 54 looked like it was 90 and bad for 90. And Anthony just did everything I asked him to do. And 5 months later, his brain is better. He's excited. He's like, Doc, we have to talk about this. And this is at a time the NFL is really in active denial that they have a problem. And so we did a study. He helped me with the Los Angeles chapter of the NFL Players Association. They co-sponsored my first study. High levels of damage in players. And what we found, they had 4 times the level of depression. And significantly higher incidences of dementia. But 80% of them got better when I put them on a brain health program. So it's...
Wow. Now, do you think, I know from transitioning out of sports as, a professional football player, transitioning where my identity was tied to that thing for so long, that when I left and that I had this mini identity crisis for a few years of like living in the past and will my life ever be the same type of mentality. Can the depression or anxiety come from the identity crisis as well? Or is it more tied to the traumas you hit? Because when I was in the game, I felt like I had a purpose, a mission. I didn't feel as stressed and overwhelmed, but it's when I left the game when that came up. Is it a combination or is it?
It's always a combination. Yeah. Always. I always think of people in 4 big circles. What's the physical functioning of your brain and body? So it's a biological circle. What's the psychological circle, which is your development? That really matters. And your ability to manage your mind. In my new book, Your Brain is Always Listening, I talk about the ants and the dragons.
Yes.
The ants, the automatic negative thoughts. It steal your happiness. And the dragons with big psychological issues from the past, like the abandoned, invisible, and insignificant dragon, it's my dragon, that are always sort of breathing fire on your emotional brain. So biological, psychological, social, it's like, well, how's your money? How's your relationships? I mean, we're just coming out, hopefully, of a pandemic that has spawned another mental health pandemic, right? So biological, psychological, social, and spiritual, which most psychiatrists would never touch. But 80% of the population believes in God and has deep-rooted spiritual beliefs. And it's ultimately, well, why are you on the planet? And you had lost your sense of meaning and purpose, where you had one life and then, well, all of a sudden you don't have that anymore. Right. And I'm a huge fan of Ariana Grande's song, Thank You, Next, because those 3 words are mental health.
Huge.
It's gratitude for what's happened in the past, looking forward. Absolutely. Gratitude for your career, and then like, all right, what's next? And if you had known me at the end of your career, you'd like go, good, we're not going to hit our head anymore. We're going to take care of our brain so we can do something fun, which obviously you've done.
Yeah, it's been great. We have to acknowledge the season of our life and then move on to the next season. What would you say are the 3 worst things we can do for our brain? If the brain health is the foundation for our mindset, our heart health, the way we view the world, what are the 3 worst things we can do? Whether it be taking a substance, thinking a thought, staying in a toxic relationship, being around mold all day, like what are the, trauma to the head?
Well, I mean, the worst thing you can do is not care about it, is not have brain envy. That's the worst thing
have brain envy
you can do. And I have a little tiny habit I love. I worked with BJ Fogg from the Persuasive Tech Lab at Stanford. And we worked with him for 6 months on how people change. and we created 50 tiny habits. But my favorite tiny habit is before you go to do something today, ask yourself, takes 3 seconds, is this good for my brain or bad for it? And if you can answer that question with information and love of yourself, love of your mission, you are going to be better.
Yeah.
Because when your brain is better, you're better.
Absolutely.
So that's number one, is you don't care.
Yep.
Number two is you engage in behaviors that hurt your brain, whether it's head trauma or thinking of marijuana as going green. It's not. It damages the brain. Alcohol is not a health food. Living in a mold-filled environment. You may know Dave Asprey.
Absolutely.
Dave and I are buddies.
Yeah.
He got scammed about 15 years ago, and it was like moth-eaten. It was
Really?
terrible. But he was living in a mold-filled home. And he actually did a documentary called Moldy that I'm in on the impact of an environmental toxin on your brain. And I would say the third thing, so brain envy, engage in behaviors that hurt your brain. The third thing would be you just never do anything to help your brain, such as, we talked about this before we started, table tennis, which is just a great brain game.
Yes.
Because you got to get your eyes, your hands, and feet all to work together while you think about this spin on the ball. So I think of it like aerobic chess. And people never think about their cerebellum. It's the Rodney Dangerfield part of the brain. Now, I'm horrified because many young people don't know who Rodney Dangerfield is. He was a comedian who used to say, I get no respect. And then he'd talk about why he got no respect. Well, in the back bottom part of your brain, there's cerebellum actually means little brain. It's 10% of the brain's volume, but it has half. 50% of the brain's neurons. And it's involved in coordination, which is why table tennis is great for your cerebellum, but also thought coordination, how quickly you can integrate new information. And we know people who have ADD have sleepy cerebellums. People who have autism awfully have damaged cerebellums. And so athletics are so important, right? These coordination exercises like martial arts is amazing, as long as you don't hit your head, as long as you don't hit your head, because the brain is soft about the consistency of soft butter, tofu, custard, somewhere between egg whites and Jell-O, and your skull is really hard and has sharp bony ridges. This is why the thousands of blows you took to your head are just bad. Helmets don't protect brain damage, protect you from brain damage. They protect you from skull fractures. But inside your brain is doing this repeatedly. And that's not a good thing. You can't like take your laptop and just drop it repeatedly and expect it to do what it needs to do.
Oh my gosh, I just keep thinking of the decades of brain hitting over and over. But I think, what I love about your message and your research is that it doesn't matter if you've been through that in the past, as long as you're aware of it and you start to practice habits and routines and really set your environment up, your relationships, these 4 circles up for success, you can really heal a lot of the past trauma in the brain. Is that right?
Absolutely.
How much?
That's the exciting thing.
How much from these scans you've done where people have had horrible looking scans, I mean, whether it be brain trauma or sexual trauma, whatever it is, that they were stuck in some type of brain trauma. And they went on a program of better lifestyle, better habits, spiritual growth, personal development. Were you able to see a significant transformation within a year, 5 years, 10 years? How long does this take?
Well, I have Anthony Davis's scans 10 years apart and dramatically better. Or one of my favorite NFL players, his name is Duval Love. He was an offensive guard for the Los Angeles Rams for 12 years. And when I saw him, he's obese, he's depressed, he's been to jail, he's a mess. And he just did what I asked him to do. And that's why I love my NFL players, because
they're coachable.
They're used to being coached.
Tell me what to do, coach. I'll do it.
Hey, coach, tell me what to do. And he lost 110 pounds. and he's actually ended up getting his master's degree. I was like, oh my God. And, you know, he's trim, he's happy, he's fit, and his brain is radically better. Now, it depends, right, on how much you played and how many hits and how damaged it is. And it also depends on the brain you brought into football. Because some people brought really healthy brains into football. They had parents who cared, they had reasonable nutrition and so on. And some people brought in terrible brains.
Yes.
But 80% of our people get better, especially if they do what we ask them.
Is this better in terms of like, okay, you're 80% back to a super healthy, perfect brain? Is it like, wow, this thing's unbelievable, off the charts healthy? Like everyone can envy your brain even if you went through trauma? Or is it like, it looks really good?
It depends on what you start with.
Yeah.
One of my other players, Anthony Trucks, who I just love, his brain was suffering when I first saw him.
Really?
And a
Anthony
year
Trucks
later.
from Oregon? Oregon football player who played in the NFL for a few years? I know Trucks, yeah.
Yeah, I love him.
Good guy.
And he just did what I asked him
Super positive guy.
to do.
Yeah.
And a year later, his brain's healthy.
Really?
Yeah.
So it wasn't healthy when he came in. A year later, it's healthy.
Right. And that's the cool thing about the brain. Every day, your brain, and there's an area called the hippocampus. And so I don't know if this is too much neuroscience, but the cerebellum's really important. The hippocampus is really important because it's involved with mood and memory.
Interesting.
And it's Greek for seahorse because it's shaped like a seahorse. And every day, the hippocampus makes 700 new baby stem cells or new baby seahorses.
Every day?
Every day.
In the brain?
In the brain. You're making new cells every day. So neuroscientists, when I was taking neuroscience in medical school, they told us, you know, if you hurt your brain, sort of you're screwed and you're not getting it back. Well, that was a lie. That the brain continues to make new neurons throughout life. And every day, you're growing those babies if you put them in a healthy environment, or you're murdering them. And funny story, came out last year. I've been Miley Cyrus's doctor for about a decade, and I adore her. And she was smoking a lot of pot, as everybody knows. And but she's also an animal lover. So when I told her the pot was suffocating the baby seahorses, she's like, Dr. Raven, that's so unfair. You know I love animals. You can't say that. Take that back.
Wow.
And now she's better to her brain. Just the information. Know better, do better.
I'm going to ask you some controversial about brain health. How much is it a third of Americans are obese, or is it 2/3?
Oh, no.
2/3 of Americans?
72% of Americans are overweight.
Are overweight.
42% of us are obese.
Obese.
I published 3 studies. In fact, I did an NFL study. One of them was an NFL study. I took players at the same position who were at a healthy weight versus those that were overweight. The overweight had sleepy frontal lobes. They had decreased activity in the frontal lobe. I just published a study on 35,000 people. It's one of the largest imaging studies ever done. And there is virtually a linear correlation between as your weight goes up, the function of your brain goes down.
Really?
Oh, morbidly obese was worse than obese, which was worse than overweight, which was worse than healthy weight.
So healthy weight versus...
So healthy weight would be the best activity, and then overweight, and then obese, and then morbidly
What
obese.
consists as overweight versus obese? Is this body fat percentage?
Well, it's something called BMI, or body mass index, which in NFL players actually doesn't correlate very well. For them, it's their waist to height ratio.
Interesting.
So your waist should be half your height or less. So if you're 6 feet tall, that's 72 inches. Your waist, and you got to measure. You can't go by your pant size because the clothing industry knows that we're unhappy. And so you guys got to put a tape measure right around your belly button. And so if you're 6 feet, your waist should be 36 inches or less. And
that's good.
If it's not, then it's good to work on. Right? And you just see it as a problem to solve. But if you want to keep your brain healthy or rescue it, if it's headed to the dark place, you have to prevent or treat the 11 major risk factors. I have a mnemonic for that I read about in the books called Bright Minds. Well, if you're overweight, that automatically means you have 5 of the risk factors.
Really?
Because being overweight decreases blood flow. That's what my study showed. It increases inflammation. It stores toxins. Fat stores toxins. Like if you smoke pot, it actually stays in your body for 30
Really?
days.
Wow.
It changes your hormones. And this is like shocking for me in my NFL work, that these big, strapping, virile men are almost all low in testosterone, because when you have subconcussive blows, it damages the pituitary gland, which turns off the production of testosterone. And so belly fat especially takes healthy testosterone and turns it into unhealthy, cancer-promoting forms of estrogen.
Ooh.
And so, you have the diabesity risk factor, blood flow, inflammation, toxins, and hormones. And so
That's all from being overweight.
that's all from being overweight. It's just a thing we should be working on. And what I often say is the real weapons of mass destruction. ISIS has nothing on our food industry.
Right.
They're highly processed, pesticide sprayed, high glycemic, low fiber food-like substances stored in plastic containers. This is what's really killing the health of America. This is one of the things that sleep does. It integrates what we learn during the day. But if you're not sleeping well, or you're drinking to put yourself to sleep, it damages REM sleep, which is the most restorative sleep.